Welcome back. Just a news update for you, especially for you folks out on Long Island. The LA, always busy around this time, just got a heck of a lot slower here. From exits 49, which is Melville, to 71, the Calverton area. Both sides of the LIE have been shut down because of black ice. For you FiOS 1 viewers, coming up at the top of the hour, we're going to have much more on this, and we have reporters en route to cover this story. So stay tuned here on at least traffic development in our neck of the woods. All right, now we're going to turn back here to the issue, and it has to do with abortion and politics.
If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
I came to realize life is that gift from God, and I think even when life begins in that horrible situation of rape, that it is something that God intended to happen.
All right, I see Jessica shuddering here in the corner here as a remembrance of what happened last election season. Two former Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate. In 2 seats here, Republicans were expected to win. Well, I say former here because in part of those comments on abortion, they never got elected. They are some of the parts in our country, very red parts, where abortion restrictions may play well politically, but not in purple states like Indiana, Missouri, like we just saw with those 2 lawmakers, let alone like blue states, like Michigan. Yet, Michigan just passed a harsh abortion restriction law, petition-based measure approved by the state legislature that would ban private insurance companies from covering abortion unless women buy separate so-called rider policies if they buy them separately. And there is no exemption in this new law, even in cases like rape or incest. So, calling it straight and simple, you got to buy insurance before you're raped for you to get coverage. And it's led some to call it a rape insurance bill. Now, I'd tell you more about what's wrong with this law in Michigan, but I don't have to tonight. State Senator Gretchen Whitmer, she's a Democrat. She makes a heck of a lot better arguments than I ever could on this fact and merits or lack thereof, but also for very personal reasons that she had not disclosed before the emotional speech you're about to hear.
As a legislator, a lawyer, a woman, and the mother of 2 girls, I think the fact that rape insurance is even being discussed by this body is repulsive, let alone the way it has been orchestrated and now shoved through the legislature. And for those of you who want to act aghast that I'd use a term like rape insurance to describe the proposal here in front of us, you should be even more offended that it's absolutely accurate description of what this proposal requires. This tells women that were raped and became pregnant that they should have thought ahead and bought special insurance for it. By moving forward on this initiative, Senate Republicans want to essentially require Michigan women to plan ahead and financially invest in health care coverage for potentially having their bodies violated and assaulted. Even worse, it would force parents to have similar and unthinkably terrible discussions about planning the same for their daughters. I've said it before and I will say it again. This is by far one of the most misogynistic proposals I've ever seen in the Michigan legislature. And I'm not the only one who knows that. Right to Life of Michigan has pushed this twice before, and 2 times before, 2 different Republican governors stood up and vetoed it with conviction. You believe that women should be told they should have selected elective insurance coverage before they got raped. That is exactly what your yes vote here today means. They had to use blatant lies to even convince people that this was something worthy of signing. They told the public this was about preventing Obamacare for paying for abortions. Bull. This is about interfering with private insurance carriers and preventing them from covering needed health care for women. Right to Life told the public their goal was to put this issue on the ballot for all of us to vote on, everyone in the state. Again, evidenced by what you're doing here today, a complete lie. Your action is in complete disregard for the variety of circumstances women face. Circumstances you either don't understand or frankly don't care about. This applies to a planned pregnancy that has gone awry when a woman needs a medically necessary D&C procedure. It also applies to the deplorable acts of rape and incest that result in an unwanted pregnancy. These women will have no recourse unless they anticipated the unimaginable, unless they planned to have these unspeakable things happen to them. And let's be clear, this stance is not pro-abortion or anti-children born through rape or incest. This stance is merely upholding a woman's right to make her own decisions about her own body and letting people privately contract for their insurance coverage. I have a lot more prepared remarks here, but I think it's important for me to just mention a couple things. We read a letter from a woman named Jenny Lane when it first became clear that this legislature was going to move forward on this issue. In an effort to try to give a face to the women that you are hurting by moving this forward. I believe her letter is going to be read here on the floor again, and I implore you to listen. Because there are people in this chamber who've lived through things you can't even imagine. I have a colleague who I was trying to encourage to tell his story, but he's still grieving. But it was a planned pregnancy that went awry and required a D&C. And I started to think about that, and I thought, I can't push one of my colleagues to share a tough story if I'm not brave enough to share one of my own. And so I'm about to tell you something that I've not shared with many people in my life. But over 20 years ago, I was a victim of rape. And thank God it didn't result in a pregnancy. Because I can't imagine going through what I went through and then having to consider what to do about an unwanted pregnancy from an attacker. And as a mother with 2 girls, the thought that they would ever go through something like I did keeps me up at night. I thought this was all behind me. You know how tough I can be. The thought and the memory of that still haunts me. If this were law then, and I had become pregnant, I would not be able to have coverage because of this. How extreme does this measure need to be? I'm not the only woman in our state that has faced that horrible circumstance. I am not enjoying talking about it. It's something I've hidden for a long time. But I think you need to see the face of the women that you are impacting by this vote today. I think you need to think of the girls that we're raising and what kind of a state we want to be where you would put your approval on something this extreme. I ask that you at least let the people of the state have a vote on this. Don't ram it through using some loophole that is going to impact 100% of the women in this state when only 4% of the people signed onto a petition. Let the people decide. Let the people of Michigan decide. I ask that my comments be my no vote explanation.
That again, Senator Whitmer from Michigan. And Andrew, tell everybody what happened next after that emotional speech.
It passed. The bill passed. It's now the law in the state of Michigan, so that you would need to buy that supplemental insurance in order for an abortion to be covered, even in the case of rape or incest.
There's really not more you got to add to that conversation, but you know, Dominic, I think people become jaded about lawmakers, and I understand why. We've been let down by a whole bunch of them. Sometimes the motives or the self-interest or duplicity out of them, but you hear her talk. Forget about the fact and the reason, but the ability to share something that personal here, and you at least have hope, forgetting even on this issue, that we do put people in office that get it.
You would hope so. You would want that to be the way of your elected officials, but it's not that way anymore. I mean, it's almost, the divide is so large, Richard, it's almost like some, not all, elected officials, it doesn't matter what the public says. This is why I say night after night, the polls mean absolutely nothing, because they go in there and do what they want to do anyway. And it's just really sad that, after listening to something like that they would go ahead and rubber stamp what they wanted to do anyway. It mattered, completely didn't matter at all. But this is why, and this is going to sound very simplistic, what we just saw is why I say to people, you have to register and vote. Remember, about half the country doesn't vote. If somebody doesn't represent your interests, and obviously in the state of Michigan they're not representing the interests of women, then why do you keep putting them back in office? It's that simple.
We've had this on issues before, background checks. 90% of Americans want it, but we can't get it through Congress, and even 3/4 of the NRA does. We'll talk about guns a little later in the program, but, Jessica, politics aside, you hear that conversation, and she went through point by point the falsehoods that people were saying, what the legislation was or wasn't about. She talked about that this had been tried before, but twice Republican governors said, this isn't who we are, and they said no to it. I know this could never get through in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, where people are watching us now, but you step back, you had to think about this to craft this piece of legislation. This is a private insurance company, okay? This isn't you paying for the procedure or whatever else. It's a private insurance company. You are saying that a woman who's either a victim of rape, incest, or that has pregnancy that could even cost her life, or the child unfortunately has passed in the womb, that you're going to make them in advance buy special insurance for that? I guarantee you the insurance companies didn't lobby to have this done. This was the Right to Life lobby that put this in. That has nothing to do with the taxpayers. To me, almost as bad as the vote is that people had to think about this and craft it and manipulate with falsehoods the debate around this to try and drive this to the fore, and then the cowardice at the end of the day of the lawmakers who knew what they were voting for, and they still pushed it through. I don't know what's worse about this, but I do know, hearing that woman speak, the courage it took to do what she did, and how powerfully she said it. We saw that in Texas earlier in the year from Wendy Davis.
I give her enormous credit for speaking out and telling her story, because I think, especially not only as a woman, but a woman in elected office, and you sometimes feel a need to be extra reserved and not show emotion, and I think it was probably really difficult for her to get up there and tell that story. So I give her a lot of credit for having the bravery to do that and put a face to what she went through, and try to advocate, on behalf of women against sexual assault. I don't understand why they're getting involved in private companies to begin with. To me, that just doesn't make sense. It should be, if there was a situation where it had to be regulated, where insurance companies were denying coverage, that's a different situation.
Yeah, this was a proactive move by the lobby group
bill
here on the pro-life.
Well, we just came through a segment where we were talking about overreach, potential overreaches, and what political parties do with their power. This was, parties can go too far. This is one of those areas, is one of those subjects where Republicans, I think, would be smart to tread cautiously, very cautiously, if at all.
Part of the debate, though, about the direction of our country's healthcare system and what we expect.
But this has nothing to do. But what I want to be careful is this has nothing to do with Obamacare at all.
Well, it has to do with the fact of, are we going to wind up with a situation where with certain insurance companies or certain doctors where we have to get riders for specific things? Like if you anticipate you're going to have certain diseases
there may be some legitimate
that are
points
hereditary.
you're making, but that's not what happened in Michigan.
It's not.
And I want to be careful the viewers at home don't get confused. There's some altruistic rationale on the part of the legislature here to right a wrong or whatever else.
I'm saying that it should be part of a larger debate about what we expect from our insurance companies and our healthcare system in this country, and having a separate rider for certain healthcare instances, I think is something that we need to address. Is that the kind of care that we're going to grow to expect, where it's divvied up like that? I think that's problematic.
When we come back, everyone, we will hear from another powerful conversation from a mom who lost her daughter 5 years ago, nearly to the day, in a senseless act of gun violence. And this mother and grandmother now is speaking out and has written a book about why she says it doesn't have to be this way. We'll have that conversation after this.